Back in my school days, I did a report on boxing in America throughout the course of history. I mostly focused on post-1900s boxing and how the stars and prominent figures of the time have almost always been a direct reflection of racial and ethnic groups experiencing injustice or oppression in the country at that point in time. Boxing was and still is a very hard way to make a living, especially when coming from practically nothing, as most high-profile boxers and fighters have. Fitting in boxing training wherever possible, oftentimes before or after a long, hard day's work, all for a chance at becoming an all-time great. For the first part of the century, from 1900 to about the 1930s or 40s, it was that good old immigrant mentality. Irish, Polish, and Jewish Americans were all over the boxing scene, such as Tony Canzoneri, Leo Lumsky, Jimmy McLarnin, and Jackie Fields. In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right in sync with the civil rights movement in America, a lot of Black Americans rose to dominance, such as Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Thomas Hearns, and Sugar Ray Leonard. And in the 1990s and 2000s, you can see so many Mexican American and Hispanic American immigrants competing and succeeding in the sport, such as Julio Cesar Chavez, Pac-Man, Oscar de la Hoya, and Canelo. It isn't exactly a perfect reflection, but if you look at the top boxers of a particular era, it was a pretty good indication of what was happening in America at that moment in time. Tough people from tough places trying to provide for their families and represent their history and heritage by fighting in a ring of combat. So forgive me if this video comes off as a little bitter. That is not its intent. So I will state this video's intent clear as day right now. Number 1. To show that Jake Paul hasn't fought anyone with even decent striking and that he does not intend to. And number 2. That Ben Askren is not an accurate representation of MMA striking. And I'll list a few potential opponents who are actually a good representation of MMA striking. Again, I am not bitter. I am simply laying out the facts, as I have no problem acknowledging that Paul has boxing skills, and the main reason I dislike him is for his manipulation of children and blanket disrespect for MMA fighters. So I really don't even know how to start off this video, besides saying Ben Askren vs Jake Paul sure was something. The event itself was bizarre, to say the very least. Multiple musical acts and weird commercials and skits in between fights that were confusing, weird, and out of place. I felt like I was watching the Grammys or something, where a bunch of rich people are sitting around and talking, and somehow I'm supposed to be thrilled or find it entertaining. The commentary was hectic, with everyone talking over each other, and the ignorance and disrespect spewed at the fighters was at an all-time high. The whole night, I was so confused about Triller's target demographic. I mean, if you're trying to target the younger demographic, which I really hope they aren't, that a guy like Jake Paul brings, then why all the cussing, smoking, drinking, and gambling advertisements? If you're trying to target the older combat sports audience, then what's up with having a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old girl TikTok stars putting belts around grown men? I have never felt so uncomfortable watching a belt be put around the waist of a fighter after a fight. Why the theatrics and musical numbers? And how are you going to have the ring announcer mispronounce the last name of one half of the main event? Askren is not even a hard name to pronounce, especially after weeks of hearing it in constant advertising. This was one of the most bizarre Bush League events that I've ever watched, and it belongs right in there with the rough and rowdy boxing tournament mockeries that idiot Dave Portnoy puts on. But hey, that's show business, I guess. And as they say, whatever makes money makes sense. But man, what a circus that event was, with a target demographic of brainless hype beasts and children with access to their mom's credit cards that should be in bed. But never mind all that, it's not like I paid for the pay-per-view anyway. But first things first, let me start off by giving Jake Paul his props. Did he go in there and knock Ben Askren on his butt? Yes he did, legitimately. No one can take that away from him. He looked good against Ben Askren and legitimately set up that cross to the head that put Ben Askren down with multiple shots to the body. a classic strategy that has been used time and time again in combat sports, showing actual basic knowledge for the sport of boxing. Congratulations! As we are all aware, Jake Paul is already rich. With a net worth of around 20 million US dollars, he's essentially famous thanks to success on the now dead Vine app, a role on a Disney Channel show, and success on YouTube. He's been involved in many scandals, including scamming his mostly child audience into gambling schemes. Basically, if you know a parent that doesn't actually parent and instead just throws an iPad to their children so that they can continue on with their precious lives, well yeah, this is who their kids are watching, and as a direct result, making popular and lining their pockets. So thanks for that, all my bad and absent parents out there. But my point is, with that wealth of money comes free time and lots of it, so lots of time to train. And with money comes influence and resources to buy legitimate trainers and sparring partners to get him the best possible training and experience, as well as being able to get the best nutrition, facilities, and recovery equipment that money can buy. So honestly, how impressive is it that Jake Paul can actually box with the amount of time and resources at his disposal? Now, with all that being said, let me tell you why no fight fan that is in their right minds will be giving Jake Paul props. And no, I'm not in the group of people that think Ben Askren took a dive for money, or how this fight was somehow rigged in any way other than the fact that Jake Paul had all the odds stacked in his favor. Like I said before, I give Paul his props as he has obviously put in the work and can box. But we have to slow down for a second before saying this guy is anything but a good to decent amateur level boxer. The reason I say this is because it's obvious that even though Jake Paul would like to be known as a fighter, he doesn't want to fight anyone that he hasn't absolutely handpicked and has a clear physical advantage over. As far as I know, Paul tried to fight the following guys on April 17th. And let me know if you notice a trend beyond the typical record padding in boxing. Michael Bisping, Dillon Danis, and Ben Askren. So Michael Bisping is a retired 42-year-old former UFC champion. Unlike most folks Paul has fought or tried to fight, Bisping is actually 6'1" with a 75.5-inch reach and fought at middleweight, so he is actually the same size or bigger than Paul. But Michael Bisping literally only has one eye and had a full knee replacement in 2019. Dillon Danis is best known for being Conor McGregor's jiu-jitsu coach, and while he has great accolades in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu world with multiple IBJJF championships, he doesn't have a lot of striking experience. Danis fights at 170 pounds. Danis has had just 2 MMA fights, and though that's a step in the right direction because he is 27 years old and the only fighter on this list that's not retired. But again, Danis currently has a blown out knee, or at least he did at the time that Paul was looking to fight him. Which brings us to Ben Askren. Ben is a former 1FC and Bellator champion in MMA, but he was never a striker. And the only reason why he was able to hang in there with the strikers in MMA is because of the huge threat of his wrestling, where he is one of the most dominant grapplers in MMA's history. Did you hear what I just said there? He was never a striker. But he is a former Olympian in wrestling and one of the most accomplished fighters out there, nonetheless. So only an absolute moron would say something like this. Askren has never been a striker, has absolutely zero boxing experience, as I just stated, was barely even acceptable, let alone good, at striking while in MMA. Askren is a smaller man than Paul, noticing a trend here, at 5'11" with a 72-inch reach, and competed his whole career at 170 pounds. He is retired and has been since 2019. The man is 36 years old and was on the couch for almost a year and a half before getting a hip replacement in December. Yeah, that's a major surgery that requires months of rehab and recovery time. So not only did Askren have to come back from major invasive surgery, but he had to get into fight shape and try to improve his boxing enough to take on a guy that has been training exclusively boxing for the last couple years. but he also had to do it on an extremely abbreviated timeline of a couple of months. And even then, apparently Ben Askren showed up to Freddie Roach's famed wildcard boxing gym in shape and was able to spar and get a workout in on the very first day. He just simply got outclassed in the fight because he isn't a boxer. So, oh yeah, that's definitely a lack of effort, Portnoy. Good call. You're an expert in all things sports for sure. I always go to you for the best takes on combat sports, especially. And I really don't know if I've ever seen anything like this. And this is pretty much the only reason I'm making this video, but what is up with Jake Paul wanting to be known as a boxer, but only wanting to box MMA fighters? What is up with that? It's almost like he wants to compete exclusively against guys who don't train in boxing, but yet wants credit like he's beating a world-class boxer when he defeats them. Sorry, Jake, it just doesn't work that way, at least not with people who actually care about combat sports. Again, I'm not going to not give this man his props, as it's obvious he's been training and has potential. I'm simply saying that if you are a competitor, then why wouldn't you want to compete at the very least against another boxer if you want to be known as a boxer? I can understand you want a big name to sell a pay-per-view to, and lower level boxers don't offer that. But is that really the reason why? And yes, as I said earlier, I do realize that pro boxers pad their records against less skilled guys too, but the difference is they do it against actual pro boxers. But okay, that's fine, I'll bite, I'll play your little game, man. Here are some current MMA fighters that I'd actually like to see Jake Paul fight because he'd actually match up well against them. But more importantly, they'd be a much better representation of striking in mixed martial arts. How about Tyron Woodley? Tyron Woodley fights at 170 pounds in the UFC and is kind of towards the tail end of his career at 39 years old. Woodley stands at just 5'9" because I know it's important for Jake to have the physical advantage. Woodley has a name and stock in the game, being a former multiple-time UFC champion, and T-Wood is predominantly a wrestler, but he does actually have KOs, unlike Askren, while on his feet on his record, albeit some of them were a direct result of his takedown threat. Also, Woodley has been on a bit of a slide as of late, having lost his last 4 fights. Plus, the seeds have already been planted as part of Paul's entourage. Jaleon Love was talking a lot of junk for a guy that's trying to latch onto the coattails of another man's success.
Tyron,
I did see that.
Woodley, okay? That's the fucking seed, okay?
Jesus Christ.
That's the fucking seed!
I think it'd be an interesting fight and a lot more competitive one. T-Wood has 0 boxing fights. Or maybe Paul Daley, a former UFC fighter who's now fighting in Bellator. He is also 5'9" and fights at 170 pounds, though his past 2 fights have been at 175 pounds. But Daley is 38 years old and nearing the end of his career as well, but has legit Muay Thai and kickboxing accolades. Though Daley might not have the name recognition that Paul is looking for, especially for how dangerous of a fight it is. Daley has 32 KOs/TKOs and his 43-17-2 pro MMA record, but also boasts a 21-3 pro kickboxing record. Daley also has 0 pro boxing fights. Or, hang on for this last one, I mean you're really going to have to strap in and brace yourself for this next suggestion. How about Jake Paul fights an actual pro boxer that is within 10 pounds of his weight? Literally any pro boxer that has at least 1 win on his record. Anyone at all will do. Shoot, Tommy Fury, the half-brother of Tyson Fury, called out Paul on Twitter following his fight, and that's something that I would actually entertain. Fury competes at 180 pounds and stands at 6 foot, so again, Jake will have a little size advantage on him. Plus, even though Tommy is 5-0 in pro boxing, his opponents had a combined record of 12, 174, and 5. Yes, and I did read that right, 174 losses. So yeah, do with that information as you'd like, but that'd be a good fight to put on next and would actually warrant respect for Jake Paul, as opposed to fighting guys that are retired, coming off major injuries and surgeries, and don't have good striking in MMA, let alone boxing. Again, I'm not exactly up in arms about the result of the Ben Askren vs Jake Paul fight. It was a little fast of a stoppage for me, but that's okay. It was very obvious that this was a very probable outcome, and at least Ben Askren made a huge payday. Unfortunately, because of how little money there is in MMA and how much money there is in boxing, undoubtedly Paul will be able to convince more MMA fighters to fight him in the boxing ring if he wants to. And I really don't foresee this guy taking any real risks anytime soon. So he will continue to be able to pick and choose fights against MMA guys without adequate striking skill sets in order to make money and make himself look like a badass to the uneducated or casual fight fan and mainstream hype beast. So shout out to boxers like James Toney and Clarissa Shields, who I'll be covering in a later video for her MMA debut later this year, for crossing over to a sport like MMA. Shoot, even shout out to a guy like CM Punk for coming into MMA from the WWE and not cherry picking, doing it the right way, training and just going and fighting a real opponent and letting the chips fall where they may. You either win or lose, but at least they have the gall to get in there with a real challenge. I, like most combat sports fans, shoot, most real life human beings can respect that. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the delay in the debut of this video, but I have been working on several videos the past couple of weeks. If you enjoyed this video, look forward to my video coverage on Clarissa Shields' crossover to MMA. I have a few video topics in the pipe and want to know what you guys would like to see. Leave a comment down below with your vote for Welcome Back TJ Dillashaw, a prospect breakdown on Kasan Magomedov, or recent big name fighter releases from the UFC. I want to make videos you guys are interested in and would love any feedback on my video. Also look out for when I launch my Patreon page and new social medias later this year to follow for more content in the near future. Your support is always appreciated, and I thank you for helping my channel grow. Have a good one.